I just predicted that you were going to use a word game to try to define your God as being, because that's all you ever do. You've never presented evidence in any of your presentations. You think that arguments are evidence, just like every apologist does, because they don't have any evidence to point to. So you have to come up with a word game.
Hello, welcome to Justified Nonetheless. I am Kevin Berger, and I apply the principles of polemics and skepticism to atheism and the claims made by atheists. For years, when I have disputed the concept of non-belief with atheists, I've issued them a challenge, and the typical response is to not take it seriously. The challenge is this: formulate your best argument for why you are unconvinced as to the claimed existence of any deity, then substitute the words genuine distinction between non-belief and belief to the contrary for the word God. You will then have my beginning of my argument for why I am convinced that non-belief is a nonsensical concept that is the product of wishful thinking on the part of people who wish to eschew the burden of proof or the need to justify anything, and so they have constructed a framework by which they can maintain the facade of being justified without ever having to do the work to be justified. Since this challenge is typically declined, I've decided to be creative, and so I will now present to you Aron Ra arguing against the existence of non-belief.
In my experience, believers hate nothing more than the burden of proof, and that's why they try to redefine what evidence means so that it is no longer a fact that indicates. Because they can't give you any facts, not to point their way, so they give arguments instead of evidence, essentially word games trying to define their God into existence, with erroneous or fallacious assumptions built into most of them. If you ever look at a list of logical fallacies, you might notice that every one of them has been used as an argument. In my experience, every argument involves at least one logical fallacy and usually more than one. And as I'm sure we will both demonstrate in our upcoming discussion, at which time I will claim that as one of many facts and evidence in my case against unbelief. Of course, the first fact in evidence against unbelief is that there is no evidence for God. We have to start there, because logically, having no reason to believe something is a pretty good reason not to believe it, especially when such is neither probable nor even possible. We don't get to say that anything is possible because we know too many things that are not. A cow cannot jump over the moon, for example. That's not just improbable, that's physically impossible. In order to say whether something is possible, there must be a precedent or parallel or verified phenomenon indicating that such possibility exists. You don't have that for ghosts or demons or souls, or for magical enchantments like blessings or curses. So not only is none of that evident, it's not even a possibility to consider. And note that their most popular reasons for believing have nothing to do with evidence. Again, as always, belief is assumed in lieu of evidence and maintained despite all evidence to the contrary. Evidence is a body of facts, objectively verifiable data indicating one conclusion or eliminating another. If the truth is what the facts are, then we have nothing at all to imply that there even could be a unbelief.
I'm sure that everyone will forgive me for dubbing over Aron, because the point should be obvious to anyone who is sincere and exercises any intellectual honesty. We have no empirical evidence to suggest that a genuine distinction between non-belief and belief to the contrary exists in reality. We don't even have empirical evidence that suggests that an absence of belief is possible in reality. We have no precedent, no parallel, no verified phenomenon for that. In fact, we have a fair amount of evidence that indicates that's not possible. For instance, we have evidence that belief isn't a choice. And for anyone who claims that they choose not to believe until there's sufficient evidence to warrant belief, that's an extraordinary claim that requires extraordinary evidence, to say nothing of the fact that there are non-resistant non-believers worldwide who sincerely express a desire to believe in the existence of a deity, coupled with the inability to do so. We have evidence that belief can be formed by life experience. We have evidence that belief can be held without conscious awareness, deliberation, or endorsement. We certainly have evidence that people hold unjustified beliefs. People try to deflect when I ask for evidence by making inane comments like, if you don't understand how a lack of belief does not necessarily constitute belief to the contrary, I don't know any clearer way to explain that than I already gave you, which incidentally, is a direct quote from Aron in an email that he sent to me. The problem is, as I told him, and to which he never did respond, to the shock of no one, I do understand the idea just fine. There simply isn't any empirical evidence to support the distinction in reality. Belief is neurological. Beliefs are mental states. They are the product of chemical reactions and electrical impulses in the brain. They are testable, measurable, empirical. Yet I have yet to be presented with a shred of empirical evidence to support this neurological claim. Why is it then that every time I ask for empirical evidence to substantiate the asserted neurological distinction between not believing in the existence of deities and belief in the non-existence of deities, the following occurs? 1, the atheists conflate Gnostic atheism with propositional atheism and insist that just because I don't believe P doesn't mean that I am asserting not P, and that I am trying to burden shift because they don't have a burden of proof for the non-existence of any deity, when at no point have I even alluded to them having the burden of proof for the non-existence of any deity, and I have explicitly stated what burden of proof I am assigning to them, because not asserting not P doesn't preclude believing not P, and that is the topic of discussion. And or 2, they argue by assertion, by repetition, make appeals to definition and to personal anecdote, commit conceptual fallacies and a litany of other logical fallacies, but never provide an iota of empirical evidence. And more often than not, they don't even try. When I demand empirical evidence for this, atheists falsely accuse me of burden shifting, and by doing so, they are
clearly lying.
Firstly, burden shifting is when someone makes an assertion and demands that the other person disprove that assertion. I am an irreligious agnostic and make no assertion for the existence of any deity, so there is nothing for them to disprove on that front in the first place. Secondly, I only assign the burden of proof for the non-existence of any deity to the Gnostic atheists who actually make that assertion, in which case the onus is already on them because it's their assertion. And there are no special rules for negative claims. Incidentally, in the case of Gnostic atheists, because possessing the knowledge that no deity of any kind exists anywhere would require omniscience, and this is a trait that no human possesses, no one can know that any deity exists, even if it is true, and those who claim to know can't.
Then that's called lying.
Thirdly, the burden of proof that I am assigning in most cases for the claimed distinction between not believing in deities and believing that there are no deities, because that is their assertion. And so once again, the onus is already on them. I make no assertion that there is no genuine distinction, though I am thoroughly convinced that this is the case. I concede that I may be mistaken. And so this doesn't rise to the level of knowledge for me, and I don't make that assertion. And here's the kicker. Even if it is true that there is a genuine distinction between not believing in deities and believing that there are no deities, because belief can be unconscious, the unconscious is largely accessible to the conscious mind, and because we have no means by which to positively identify specific beliefs in the human brain, no one can know that a belief is absent. And so when people claim that they do know this,
then that's called lying.
Fortunately, for me, once again, I'm not claiming to know what anyone does or does not believe, so I don't bear a burden of proof for that. What I am saying is that the best that we can do is to infer the presence of belief based on action because action entails the presence of belief. And not even that is foolproof. So until next time, remember, even if your beliefs aren't necessarily true, they should be justified nonetheless.